recent attacks in Paris are likely to have ramifications across Europe. Here to discuss this is joining me Mr. Bohdan Yaremenko. He's a political analyst and a former Ukrainian diplomat. Welcome to Viewpoint.
Thank you.
So how do you think the European Union states are going to react to this terror attack in Paris?
Well, for the moment, we see the immediate reaction of the French government is firm, it's solid. The French government is trying to protect the citizens, to find out who the terrorists are, who are supporting them. That's why they implementing some restrictions. They're closing the borders, they asking the people to stay in their homes. This is important, and probably this is the right thing to do in the terms of the next couple of days. But in the terms of creating the strategy of fighting with the terrorism, of finding the profound responses on the profound questions, of course, this is not enough. And in this respect, I really very much like the reaction coming to France from all over the world. It's a very, I would call it, healthy reaction. So the countries like United States, Britain, Italy, even Ukraine, and all other countries surrounding France and uniting or having the same values, democratic values, they showing to France the signal: please do not close your political borders. Please stay open. We are ready to cooperate. We are sympathetic towards you. So we are ready to support you. We are ready to fight with you. So let us unite our efforts to fight the common evil.
Now, you just said political borders. What about actual borders? Will other European Union states think about closing their borders? This
is the tendency we must follow, because the tendency is that to implement more and more restrictions on travels, on the border crossings. We see it's been done not just on the part of France, but on the part of other European Union members. And, well, for the time being, maybe it would provide those countries with some security, but it will not definitely provide the answers on the question of international terrorism, because we see that more and more citizens of those countries that are trying to protect themselves from the terrorism are actively participating in those events in the Middle East, in Syria, so on, so on, so on. And sooner or later they will return back home, and there is no way to protect yourself of your citizens coming back or returning back to your country.
So what steps should be potentially taken by France and others? Is intelligence sharing an option?
Intelligence sharing is one of the mechanisms that should be reconsidered, strengthened let's say, in the context of providing more anti-terrorist activities. But we should be smart. We should create an effective strategy which would also cover the issues: what should be done on the grounds in Syria, what should be done on the grounds in the northern Africa, in the Middle East, all over Asia. We see this fight between totalitarianism and democracy taking place on the larger areas, on the huge areas, starting from the northern Korea up to all over Asia, Africa, and all the way to the Latin America. So we should think how, let's say, European Union, the rest of the better developed world could share their, let's say, could share what they have in the terms of material things, on the terms of technologies, on their political know-hows with the rest of the world, to improve the situation in those suffering regions, to stop the huge amounts of the waves of illegal migrants coming from all over the world to the United States, to the European Union.
So basically, you think all the problems, including the migration crisis, stems from a lack of a solution to the Syrian war?
Not just to the Syrian war, but to a lot of wars and conflicts, including the Syrian one. So this is the most recent one and probably the most brutal one. But there are much more happening all over the world, and people are scared to live wherever they live in, and they looking for the better place to live. Yes, so we would need to find an answer: what should be done to prevent those conflicts? What are our values? How can we fight for those values or support them, not just internally within our countries, but in outer world, in the regions far beyond of European Union, of, let's say, our country, Ukraine, but where the situation is deteriorating and affecting our country. So yes, this is not just about the special forces operations, anti-terrorist operations. So those operations are vital for security, no doubts about this. But they will not provide us with a clear answer how to stop terrorism, how to prevent it.
Russia's intervention, airstrikes in Syria, have they influenced the situation in Europe?
Well, right now, especially after the terrorist attacks in Paris, so what Russia is doing is sending some messages to France, to the United States, that let's forget about our contradictions, difficulties between us, let's forget about Ukraine, and let's concentrate and unite our efforts to fight Islamic State in Syria. This is a very tricky situation for a simple reason. You cannot trust the country in fighting against the terrorism if this country and this government is supporting terrorism in other regions. I mean, Russia Federation is clearly supporting terrorism in Ukraine. And of course, you cannot trust this country, and you cannot count on it because at some of the point you could find out that your partner is in reality undermining you and doing something quite opposite of what has been declared. So yes, Russia is trying to create an illusion that participants in Syria is a constructive one, and it's supporting the efforts provided by the United States and the European Union, but in reality it's undermining those efforts.
What if Russia and the West team up and actually fight in Syria? Is there a chance of Russia demanding that sanctions be lifted as a result of cooperation with the West? Do you see that happening?
Most likely Russia would be pushing in this direction, and it is already doing this. On the part of the Western countries, so far there are no indications that they're ready to accept this strategy and this approach. But of course, Ukraine needs to follow this situation and to be quite active diplomatically as well, explaining that the fight against terrorism is the fight for your values, and it means that you would need to fight it globally, not just in Syria. Ukraine is also a part of solution, or should be the part of solution.
Let's talk about anti-Islamic sentiment. Do you think that it's going to rise after these attacks in Paris? Generally in Europe, not just in France.
Let's first speak about Ukraine. I believe here we are on the safe side. I believe Islamic community here in this country is quite loyal to our country, is very peaceful. And I have a lot of friends among Muslims here in this country. We have indigenous people, the Crimean Tatars.
So you don't think radicalization has actually happened in Ukraine for
I hope that the Ukrainian
Muslims?
nation will understand the situation correctly, and this will not affect the inter-ethnic relations in our country or relations between Christians and Muslim populations. So we should be very smart here, and I hope that we will be successful. Of course, for a lot of people in Paris who are witnessing those killings, it will be very emotional time. It would be very difficult for them to analyze the situation in a very pragmatic way. But hopefully, and we already see a lot of very good examples of people explaining that this is not about fights against Christians and Muslims, that it should be considered as the fight for your values and not for your religion. So I hope, because those terrorist attacks unfortunately has happened before, and so far the civilized world was able to understand it correctly and to react correctly on the attacks as we right now surviving and witnessing in Paris.
If the EU decides to limit the number of refugees coming into Europe, do you think that this will affect Ukraine in a way? Will it affect the visa-free regime that Ukraine is trying to get?
Well, if the European Union would decide to go and to implement the defensive strategy just to protect its borders and nothing else, of course it will affect Ukraine's intentions to get the visa-free regime with the European Union. But it's, again, it's too premature to judge. It's just we are at the beginning of the process of reconsidering the migration situation or the political situation in Europe. Should, let's say, the European Union be pragmatic and not emotional. It's quite simple. This situation is quite simple. For analyze, Ukraine presents no danger for European Union. So we already have the millions of Ukrainians working in the European Union, and it doesn't look that, for me at least, that more than this would ever join them. Would leave Ukraine to join those Ukrainian diasporas in the European Union countries. So it looks like that Ukraine is not presenting any danger for European Union. From the point of view of illegal migration or the next wave of migration. From the point of view of what's happening in Syria, of course, those migrants are not usually looking for Ukraine as the territory, the hideout, or the place to stay. They're looking for some places and countries in the better economic shape, which could provide them some social guarantees. And of course, Ukraine at this time is not capable of providing them with a level of services, protection, assistance that they need. So most likely they would continue to look for some ways to get into the European Union. And again, this is the time for Europeans to understand this is not enough just to close the border. You must be concentrated on what's happening in Syria, why it's happening, who are your enemies, who are your friends, how to affect the situation in Syria, in Africa, all over the world.
Mr. Yaremenko, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
We've been joined by Mr. Bohdan Yaremenko, a political analyst and a former Ukrainian diplomat. You've been watching Viewpoint on Ukraine Today. Thanks for coming in again. You're like